In revising our narrative myth reimaginings, we want to take a careful look at our organization of our work. If our organization isn't clear, then our reader's going to have a difficult time understanding our content and the material that we want to convey in our story. So what we're going to do at this station now is take a look at how we organize and how we structure the paragraphs in our narrative myth. Narrative writing is a little bit different in terms of organization than informative or argument writing. Unlike informative or argument writing, we're not necessarily grouping common ideas into single isolated paragraphs as we move from topic to topic to topic. Rather, we're really working with a sequence of action, an unfolding sequence that should pattern the sequence of the monomyth or the plot structure that we looked at as we began to plan for our drafts. So when we talk about narrative story writing, there are some different tips and pieces of advice that I want to give you when it comes to changing over to a new paragraph and indenting for a new paragraph. So as we take a look at the sample essay that I wrote for you, I've highlighted and color-coded some areas and some examples of why I shifted to a new paragraph for that particular section. So let's take a look at the first one here, the one that's in kind of a red color. This is an example of shifting to a new paragraph because I have a new character or a new speaker being introduced. So you can see here, all right boys, everybody out. That's in quotation marks. So this is a piece of dialogue being spoken by Coach Granberry. When I have a new speaker, when I have new dialogue being introduced, I'm going to skip down, indent, and start a new paragraph. The next example you see here in kind of an orange color is an example of shifting to a new paragraph and indenting because I have a setting change. The story began with the team on the bus, but if you look at this sentence, it says shuffling off the bus, Corbin, me, and the others headed for the quick stop. Because I have a setting change, I'm moving on to a new location, I'm taking my readers to a new location, I want to shift down, create a new paragraph by indenting so that that organization will be clear to my reader. Hey, we're changing the scene here. Next, you'll notice that we have this sentence here in yellow, and this is an example of shifting and creating a new paragraph because I have a new character being introduced. So far we focused mainly on the main character Don and Corbin, but here you'll see Noah, one of the linemen, clapped a hand on my shoulder and peered in the direction I was looking. So if I have a new character come along, it's often helpful to break up that sequence and create that new paragraph to visually show the reader that we've got a new person being introduced into our story. Next, you'll see a green example. It says, after grumbling for only a moment, we couldn't resist the temptation to explore a little further. And in this example, we're creating a new paragraph because time is moving forward. Now, in some stories, you might jump time by a significant amount. Here, we're probably focusing on the span of, a few moments, so not a huge chunk of time, but nevertheless, time is advancing. You can tell that because I've introduced this sentence with a phrase, after grumbling for only a moment. So that keyword after shows that shift in time. And then finally, down here in the blue example, we're creating a new section, we're indenting a new paragraph because a new event is happening. We have moved to a totally different location, we're in the dragon's cave, but while we're in there, this new event is about to occur because we're about to meet our dragon. So it says, in our clamor to snatch up as many coins as possible, we were far too distracted to notice a shadow lurking near the entrance of the cave. So we know that this new event is about to occur, and we want to break apart that paragraph from the preceding one to draw attention to that new event that's on the horizon. Now, as we continue, I want to look at not just simply how we separate our paragraphs and organize our sequence visually, but also how do we show the passing of time? How do we transition from one topic to another, one event to another? And since this is a sequential story, meaning taking place in order from beginning to end, just like our monomyth cycle, right? Think of beginning to end, that cycle. We're going to use a lot of time transitions and time phrases. Now, we're not necessarily creating like a grocery list here. Okay, and what I mean by that is we don't want to rely on some of the typical sequential phrases and keywords that serve as sequential transitions, like first, next, second, last. When we use a lot of those words and we overuse them, it ends up sounding like, we're giving a set of directions or we're following a recipe. And we don't want our writing to sound that stuffy, that formulaic. So I wanted to show you in bold some of the things that I've done to show the passing of time without sounding like a summary or a list of events. So I've used several modifying phrases to show passage of time, and I've tried to be very vivid in my word choices. So the first one you see here is scrambling as far from the monster as possible. And that word scrambling is a great choice to see, how are these guys moving? Okay, if you were moving away from a dragon, you wouldn't necessarily creep, right? You would be scrambling, just clamoring to get over those rocks or boulders to get away from that thing. And next you see the phrase, almost before I could finish speaking. So again, this is showing time transition. Almost before Dawn could finish speaking, Corbin is now picking up this nearly football-sized boulder. So again, we're showing the passage of time. You can tell that with almost before. Okay, those are time signal words. Next, we have sending up a quick prayer for luck. Okay, so this is another action sequence, a modifying phrase, sending up. Here we have the word suddenly. Okay, another key time word. Here we have a clause being used, as I barreled through the narrowing crevice. Okay, the subordinating conjunction as, showing that passage of time. And even simply in just introducing this sentence, we had only just burst free. So only just, showing the short passage of time before this next sequence. So I want to encourage you to not just rely on those single, solitary, kind of traditional sequential words, but be thinking about how you can use your modifying phrases that we've recently learned about to signal time in a creative and engaging way. While we're focusing on organization, I wanted to make sure that you understood the connection between organizing our writing and being able to really examine our idea development and how well we're communicating our story and developing those events and those characters and those moments that are going to be memorable to our readers. So the next phase that you'll take is to look at one of our plot diagrams, as you can see I've done here. And I want you to trade your paper with a partner and use this plot diagram to pinpoint the phases of the monomyth that writer is using to organize and structure his or her myth. Now that's an essential requirement of your narrative. I want you to demonstrate that you know and understand the pieces of the monomyth in such a way that you can actually use them to create your own stories. And what I've done here is I've plotted those events along the plot diagram, and I've also noted what phase of the monomyth that correlates to. So I know that this is traditionally called the exposition of my story, right, the background. But when we're talking monomyth, we would call that probably the status quo, right? Okay, like where are the characters as they are in the beginning of the story before this transformational journey takes place. And as we move along here, of course, I've got my rising action, but I've also got those monomyth stages, the call to action. I've got some assistants who come along the way, right? And finally, we get to the climax of the story, which in speaking of the monomyth might be our crisis. Okay, what is the hero's darkest hour that he or she has to face? And as I've outlined those different pieces and parts of my story, parts of my monomyth, what it helped me to do is see, okay, which areas do I possibly need to develop even further? Which areas might I have kind of skimped on the details, on the character development, on the sequential, on the action development, that sort of thing. And so I actually started to look at my climax, my crisis, which I have highlighted in yellow here on the screen. It's the moment when Dawn is about to defeat, or hopefully defeat, this dragon by throwing that boulder at him. And so when I took a look at it, After I plotted it on my diagram and looked at it in my corresponding story, I began to think, well, gosh, as the climax, the crisis of my story, I may want to beef this up a little bit. I may want to go back in and add some details. This has got to be a really heart pounding moment for Don the hero, and I want to make sure I can convey those emotions adequately. I want to make sure my reader can experience those with him. So by breaking down the organizational structure of your partner's myth, your myth retelling, I want you to pinpoint those events of the monomyth as they fall on our plot diagram. And then I want you to take a careful look and help him or her see what areas need further development. Okay, and what areas might you be left wanting to know more, wanting to experience more from the story?